I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons will live together in harmony and with equal opportunity.
Education is the most powerful weapon that we can use to change the world. One of the central questions I ask in my work is, what is the future for the past? The question is important because we can learn from history and its narratives and how it was framed. How did history influence the way that we think about ourselves or about the world, society that we live in? We're in the South Africa House in Amsterdam Center. The South Africa House is not only a place for the South African communities, but also a site of memory. What do we remember about the past here? This is the center of the colonial archives. The stories about this house and many of the houses in this neighborhood are often hidden or unknown. And it's important that we are here, that we invoke this memory, also to reframe the history of why this house is important. The heritage of this place is centered mostly on white Afrikaners' memory. And now there's a movement to try to transform that narrative to make it more inclusive. Because as you enter the space as a person of color, your memory is not what is visible first. You have to search for it. The history of a continent cannot be just reduced to one story, that there are many stories that we have to try to include in this focus. And it's not that we're trying to demonize one history over another or to make victims of the history, but to try to make it more complete. Mandela had an impossible task. He represented for not just the nation, but for the world, the fight for freedom. And when I hear this notion of him being a sellout, it saddens me because I don't see him that way. I see him as the ultimate diplomat, the ultimate negotiator, understanding both sides of the situation. No one would argue that he made some compromises. But were those compromises to the really effect that it made society worse? Did he give up too much? That's still perhaps the question that history or the future will inform us. It's very important to study not only Mandela's philosophy and his experience, but also the other activists. Mandela didn't create the situation himself, and he could not dismantle the system of power that had been in place for centuries. I absolutely live in the spirit of Mandela, at least what he believed and what his mission was, to educate people, to create a sense of pride and power. And I'm inspired always by his words, by his actions. And yes, we should be critical. We should not make him into some sort of saint as a perfect person that made no mistakes. I think he would be the first to say that he did have to make some compromises, but I'm always inspired by what his intentions were and what his legacy still remains. What's so striking about looking at these oldest books is how Europeans represented African people, how they were portrayed, the study of their culture, of their history, their practices, their life. And while we can look at it now from a very objective view, we also see how it informed the way that they tried to dominate the people by first understanding who they were. And these archives, these are the oldest records of the Dutch exploring and studying the Khoi and the San, and first starting to develop the Cape of Good Hope. So you see so many of these images, these etchings, and how they are portrayed. Language is really important because the Hottentotten, as they were referred to, is a very derogatory reference. The Khoi and the San and the land itself, the people, how they identify it was very different than how the Dutch described it. And that's what I'm always searching for, is that missing or hidden story that we can pull from these records. And I think one of the things that, for me, about Mandela that was so inspiring is that he was very proud of his African identity. What was very important to him is that education about pride in your ancestry and your heritage must become a part of African identity. It must be embodied in the educational system, in how we think about the past. And that is a legacy that I think is still there, even more now.